Shalom, good evening. It's a very, very great honor and pleasure to be here again at the Israeli Presidential Conference and to be back here in Jerusalem. By the way, I worked out that this visit is actually, since becoming Quartet representative, is my 66th to Jerusalem, which as someone said, there are two explanations. Either you love the place or you're crazy, or indeed it could be both. I am also honored always to be in the presence of someone who has been my political guide and mentor for many, many years, President Shimon Peres. He's been an inspiration for me politically and intellectually. And frankly, even biologically. I mean, if I get to that age, I'll be delighted. If I get to it in anything like the shape that he's in, I think someone's been smiling down from above. And as was said earlier, he never stops thinking of tomorrow and its challenges. I'm also really thrilled to be with Bernard-Henri Lévy and Amos Oz, two immensely distinguished people. I have to just say to you that when it was first put to me that I would be sharing a panel with them, as you know, Israelis are very direct. They said to me, look, you'll be sharing a panel with Bernard-Henri Lévy and Amos Oz. They're really, really smart. Now, they said, but we thought it was important that the panel was balanced. So they got probably the right appreciation of my profession, but anyway. Now, it's a great series of questions with really one theme. Should policy be decided on the basis of what's moral or what is pragmatic? It's the old debate, idealism versus realism, interests versus values. I think probably we should make one preliminary point, which is life is never quite that simple, in my experience. Idealism can be idle dreaming, in which case it's dangerous. And realism can be the acceptance of the unacceptable, in which case it's plainly wrong. Neither is compromise immoral. Compromise is often necessary. And there's something else that I learned very much when I was a political leader. Decisions are tough. It's not easy to occupy a position of leadership. Indeed, something I've learned since leaving office is that giving advice, is a lot easier than taking the decision. It's also something else I learned about the nature of decision-making, particularly in cases of intervention, is, you know, one of the things people often say to political leaders, and I had this said to me often when I was British Prime Minister, they say, why don't you listen to the people? And I used to say, I am, but they're saying different things. And that's what's tough about it. So sometimes, if I'm honest about it, you have to be guided as much by your instinct, by your inner belief and conviction. And it's true, I was an interventionist as Prime Minister, a liberal interventionist, and I remain committed to that policy. So, with all the humility I can, because life is difficult, compromises do have to be made, decisions are tough, let me offer you 4 principles by way of my opening remarks. The first is this. In an interdependent, interconnected world, values can represent interests. In other words, we see them often as if they're polar opposites. Either be true to your values or true to your interests. The reality is, for example, if you take the Middle East and the peace process here, the truth is, we have an interest in that peace process. But that peace process will never succeed unless it's also based on certain core values. If we look at climate change and the environment, yes, it's true, it may be a moral cause to protect the environment. It is also, I would argue, a sensible example of our enlightened long-term interest to try to reduce our dependence on carbon. Before I came to this conference, I spent a few days in Sierra Leone, which is one of the poorest countries in the world. 1 in 6 people, 1 in 6 children die before the age of 5, most of them from malaria, which is preventable. Now, I would argue that helping people in that situation is a moral cause. I would also argue it's in our long-term interest to make sure that people get economic advantage, some hope, some prosperity, because otherwise we may find that part of the world against us rather than with us. So, just to put it very plainly, I believe that today, more than ever before, because the world's interconnected, because what happens in one part of the world rarely stays fixed in that part of the world, we have an interest in promoting the values that we believe in. The second thing is this: action has consequences, but inaction is also a decision with consequences. Right? If we fail to intervene in situations where people are being brutally repressed and killed, that is also a decision with consequence. I remember in the early 1990s in Bosnia, we stood by, exactly because people told us it was realistic to do so, whilst thousands upon thousands of people were killed in ethnic cleansing on the doorstep of Europe. We stood by when almost 1 million people died in a period of about 2 months in Rwanda. And if you've ever visited the churches and the halls where thousands died in ethnic cleansing, you will understand why sometimes it is indeed necessary morally to be prepared to act and intervene and save people if you can. We decided in the 1980s to arm Saddam in order to thwart Iran. We decided to help the Taliban in order to prevent the Soviet Union gaining a hold in Afghanistan. But I think most people wouldn't think that very sensible long-term statesmanship today. And we face a very immediate issue, which Shimon raised: Iran, the regime, and its desire for nuclear weapons capability. Inaction, if we were to allow them to develop nuclear weapons capability, would also be a decision with consequences, which is why it shouldn't happen. So, intervention has its consequence, so does inaction. The third is that intervention, of course, should be measured by what is practical and what is proportionate. People often used to say to me, and when I was Prime Minister, you got rid of the Taliban, you got rid of Saddam Hussein and Milosevic, you intervened in Sierra Leone, why can't you do something about Zimbabwe and Mugabe? And I used to say, because I can't, because it's not possible. We face similar, very, very tough realpolitik decisions in respect of Syria today. So any measures that you take have to be proportionate. The issue has to be serious, and you have to have the practical means of implementing your objectives. So to that extent, I always say, pursuing your moral case has got to be conditioned by what is realistic. But the fourth and final point is this. When we look at the world today, in particular what is happening in this region, I think we should understand that supporting freedom is an intervention that goes with the grain of human progress. Okay? The world today is changing. We live in a completely different information age for the very reasons that Shimon was saying earlier. This movement for democracy won't go away. And it isn't about the West or the East. Freedom is not a passing phase of history. It is an existential human impulse. It's not a condition defined by one era, but the condition which defines the human spirit. And that freedom is not just about the freedom to vote, though that is important. And when we look at what is happening in the region around us, we should take the movement for democracy and say, yes, we will support the freedom to vote in and out your government, the freedom, by the way, that people have here in Israel. But along with that freedom goes the freedom of expression, a free media, freedom of religion, and an economy based on free enterprise. The future will belong to the open-minded. The future will belong to those who realize that freedom is not just about technical systems of constitutional change, but about an attitude of mind that says, I may be what I am, but I can respect you as different, and that together we can build a different and better world. One reflection I had when preparing for the conference was one of the questions they asked in the letter they sent me was, what is it about Israel and about the Jewish community that offers a way forward for this challenge today of how we combine idealism and realism and create the circumstances for freedom? And in what we in my faith call the Old Testament, some things come out very strongly. Israel and the Jewish people as one community. A God that is all-powerful, but also just. And the notion that you help the other, even the sojourner, the foreigner. And one thing I try to get across to people after all these visits here to Israel, where each time my understanding, I hope and believe, deepens and becomes richer. This country is important in many, many ways, but let me tell you why it's important to me as an outsider. Sometimes I say to people, come to Israel and you will talk about the peace process and Israel-Palestine and the importance of it and so on, and all of that is very natural. But also come to Israel. See the culture and the art and the science and the technology. See what they have created here. See what in just over 60 years people with a determination to build for the future have done. And my vision at the heart of this is very, very simple. I believe that the purpose of any intervention should be to promote that freedom that, as I say, is a condition of the human spirit. And that is the motivation that gave rise to Israel. And my vision of the future in this region is very simple. It's where not merely does the isolation of Israel end, but Israel is seen for what it is, which is actually a model for this region, a country that can offer, in how it is, in how it strives, in its essential belief in the creativity, the innovation, and the endeavor of the human spirit, that it can be seen for what it is, which is a country of hope and opportunity based on certain values that never were values of the West or Europe or America or even Israel, but are the universal values of the human spirit. That's what we stand for, it's what we cherish, and it's what we need to build here in this region and in our world. Toda, thank you.